I didn't expect anything to change that weekend. It was supposed to be just another trip, just the two of us, a cabin, a lazy few days off from college classes, and no one to impress. But something was different this time, though I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Maybe it was the way he looked at me when he thought I wasn't watching. Or maybe I was finally admitting how long I'd been pretending not to notice. I've known Marcus since freshman year. We met in the most awkward way possible gym class. He wiped out during a wrestling drill, took me down with him, and somehow that clumsy tangle turned into a 4-year friendship. He's loud when he's comfortable, quiet when he's overthinking, a little arrogant, definitely sarcastic, but loyal in the kind of way that made you want to stay close, even when he was driving you crazy. I, on the other hand, was always more of the observer. I liked calm, quiet corners, comfort over chaos, and for reasons still unknown to me, Marcus kept pulling me into the heart of both. The drive to the cabin was filled with the usual banter, him pretending to hate my music playlist, me rolling my eyes at his obsession with protein bars. It was easy between us, always had been. I liked how we slipped into our roles without trying, me, the grounded one, him, the firecracker. The cabin was tucked away in a secluded clearing, all wooden beams and forest hush, with a creaky porch swing and the faint scent of pine sap hanging in the air. The place belonged to his uncle, and we'd used it before, during exam weeks, when the city noise became too much. But this time felt different before we even unpacked. There was a beat of silence after we carried the bags in. Marcus stood in the doorway, one hand still on the frame, his other resting on the back of his neck like he was stalling for a thought that hadn't come yet. I watched him from the corner of my eye, while pretending to look through the kitchen drawers. "You want to crash in the loft, or the downstairs room?" he asked eventually. "You always take the loft," I replied, half smiling. "Wouldn't want to ruin tradition." He gave me a look, a quick flick of the eyes, like he was seeing something new in me, and then shrugged. Tradition's overrated, but he still went up to the loft anyway. Later that night, we lit the old fireplace and collapsed onto the throw pillows scattered across the floor. He challenged me to a wrestling match, said I was getting soft, that I needed to earn my weekend off. I knew he was baiting me, like always, but I let him. That's how it always started. Roughhousing that turned into breathless laughter, pinned arms and fake protests. That weird moment where we'd pause a little too long, both of us grinning, but not saying a word. And maybe that's where the shift began, right there. In the space between the laughter and the silence, where his hand pressed too long against my shoulder, and I didn't move away. Where I told him to wait, but he grabbed me tightly anyway, out of force, but out of something else. Something I didn't have a name for yet. That night, I lay in the downstairs bedroom, staring at the ceiling fan turning above me. My heart wouldn't slow down. Every second replayed in loops. His touch, the way his voice had dropped when he called my name, how my skin still buzzed where his fingers had been. I didn't know what it meant. Not yet, but I knew this wasn't just another trip anymore. Something was going to change, and I wasn't sure I was ready, but I wanted it to. Marcus and I were the kind of friends people assumed had known each other since diapers. In reality, it had only been 4 years, but time works differently when someone becomes your person. We didn't talk every second of the day, but somehow, he was always around, always waiting at the gym gate after I finished late night studying, always texting me stupid memes when he knew I was spiraling about a test, always just there. We'd slipped into friendship without a defining moment. It wasn't some dramatic spark or a rescue from a social disaster. It was the slow, quiet build of shared routines, post-class sandwiches at the food truck no one else liked, pretending to argue about who was the better driver, our running joke that I was the boring husband to his reckless golden retriever, Energy. I still remember the first time he ever stayed over. I had the flu, and he showed up uninvited, with grocery bags full of electrolyte water and instant noodles. He refused to leave, even when I tried to kick him out. If I go home, who's going to stop you from overdosing on cough syrup and watching conspiracy documentaries all night? That was Marcus. He teased like it was a sport, but the care was always underneath, unspoken but steady. Back at the cabin, we fell into our usual rhythm quickly. We made grilled cheese and burnt the first batch. We played old music and argued over who had the worst taste in 90s boy bands. We even tried to make a fire outside, which he insisted he could handle alone till the lighter fluid sprayed sideways and he singed his hoodie. Wow, I deadpanned, watching him pat himself down. Nature clearly respects you. He grinned, bits of ash in his curls. I'm a wild beast, baby. You just don't understand my methods. I understand you nearly lit yourself on fire. You say that like it's a bad thing. That was the thing about Tuzui didn't need plans. It was enough to just be in the same space, orbiting each other, comfortable. But this time, that comfort was laced with something unfamiliar. A sharp awareness of him, of how often his knee brushed mine under the table, of how his laugh always started in his chest and ended in a snort, of how I caught myself staring when he wasn't looking, and sometimes he was looking. We had a sleeping arrangement, sort of. I took the downstairs room, like always, and he took the loft. But on the second night, I walked into the guest room and realized I'd forgotten something important. No extra blanket. Marcus, I called up the stairs, trying to sound casual. You got an extra blanket up there? A moment passed. Nah, I thought they were all down there. I stared at the thin sheet on my bed and sighed. Cool. Guess I'm freezing tonight. There was a rustling sound from above, then footsteps. A minute later, he appeared at the door, barefoot and in the same faded college hoodie he always wore when he wanted to be comfortable. Take mine, he said, tossing a thick blanket onto the bed. What about you? I run hot anyway. I caught the faintest smile playing on his lips. Thanks. He didn't leave immediately. Instead, he stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame, arms crossed. You good? He asked. Yeah, just cold. He tilted his head. You sure you don't want to come up to the loft? My chest tightened. I laughed, awkward and low. You inviting me to cuddle? He didn't laugh back. Maybe. The silence that followed wasn't awkward, was thick, heavy, charged. I looked away first. I'm good here. He nodded. All right, sleep well, then. But the room stayed warmer long after he left, and I don't think it was the blanket. The next day we hiked out to the ridge behind the cabin. We didn't talk much on the way, just the crunch of leaves, the occasional bird call, the sound of our breathing sinking without effort. I liked walking with Marcus because he didn't fill the quiet with pointless noise. He let things sit. At the top, we sat side by side on a boulder, looking out over a stretch of green that went on forever. You ever think about what we'll be doing in 10 years? He asked, pulling his cap backward to keep the sun off his face all the time. And I'll probably still be boring, I said, smiling. You'll probably be wrestling bears and skydiving without a parachute. He laughed, then fell quiet. After a moment, he glanced at me longer than normal. I like boring, he said. I didn't respond. I couldn't, not with how my throat had suddenly tightened, but I felt it again. That quiet shift, that gravity between us, growing stronger, more undeniable. And in that pause, just for a heartbeat, I wondered what would happen if I leaned in, if he would lean back. The third night, everything shifted, and not in a slow, gentle way. It happened with a crack, a low rumble, and a complete blackout. We'd just finished dinner, spaghetti cooked slightly too long, garlic bread burnt on one side, and were halfway through an old card game we always played when we wanted to avoid serious conversations. Marcus had just accused me of cheating again, and I was gearing up to dramatically defend myself when everything cut off. Light, heat, sound, gone. I blinked. into the dark as the silence swallowed us. Even the fridge went quiet. Marcus stood and peered out the window. Power's out. Obviously, I muttered, already reaching for my phone. No signal. Figures. We were too deep in the woods for reliable service, something we both weirdly liked until now. It's probably just a fuse or something, he said, but there was no real confidence in his voice. Could be the lines are down. We lit a couple of candles from the emergency drawer and sat back down at the table. The flickering light cast strange shadows across his face, softening his jaw, highlighting the curve of his cheekbone. I looked away too quickly. Guess we're roughing it tonight, he said, flashing that grin that always managed to get under my skin, in both the best and worst ways. Great. Should have brought a bear costume, I replied, dry. He laughed, but I noticed the way his knee bumped mine under the table and didn't move. I also noticed I didn't move either. After half an hour, it became obvious that the power wasn't coming back anytime soon. The temperature was dropping quickly without the heater. I was layered up, but the cabin's walls were thin, and we could both see our breath misting in the candlelight. All right, Marcus said, standing up and stretching. This is dumb. I'm not freezing up there alone. You've still got that big sleeping bag. In the closet, I said slowly. But it only fits one. Barely, he said, smirking. So let's test that. I stared at him. You want to share? He lifted a brow. Unless you want me sneaking in at 3 a.m. like a popsicle. Come on, we've shared worse. Had we? I couldn't think of a single time we'd been that close. That long. I swallowed. Sure, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Whatever. We set up in the downstairs room, unzipping the sleeping bag and laying it across the mattress. It wasn't terrible, but it definitely wasn't made for two grown men with broad shoulders and restless limbs. I got in first. He slid in beside me, and suddenly, every inch of my skin was on fire. I could feel the heat from his body radiating through the fabric. His arm brushed mine. Our legs bumped. The room was silent except for the crackle of the candle on the nightstand. You good? He asked. I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Yeah, warm. He chuckled softly. Told you, human furnace. There was a beat of quiet. Then his voice again, lowered this time. Your heart's racing. I froze. You nervous or something? No, I lied. Just cold. But I wasn't. Not even close. I turned slightly, trying to get comfortable, but in doing so, my hand brushed against his chest. Warm, steady. I felt him suck in a sharp breath, then go still. Sorry, I murmured, pulling back. It's fine. But it wasn't just fine. Something was shifting. Again only now. We couldn't hide behind daylight, or jokes, or the comfort of space. The air between us was thin. Every inch felt loaded. I could feel him looking at me, even though I kept my eyes on the ceiling. You ever wonder, he said softly, if things were different? I turned to him. Different how? He was lying on his side now, head propped up on one hand, watching me with an expression I couldn't read, fully part curiosity, part caution. I dunno, he said, voice light, but eyes serious. If maybe we weren't just friends. The words hung between us like fog thick, impossible to ignore. My stomach twisted. I wanted this. God, I wanted this. But I also knew the risks. I knew how delicate our friendship was. How easily it could break under the weight of wanting more. Why? Would you say that? I asked quietly. Because, he said, I've been wondering for a while. And I think maybe you have too. I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. My body was screaming yes, but my brain was tangled in fear. You don't have to say anything, he added quickly, sensing the hesitation. I feel like something's been changing between us. He wasn't wrong. It had been changing. And now we were lying inches apart, one shared sleeping bag away from everything we'd been avoiding. I finally met his gaze. Candlelight danced in his eyes, softening the sharpness I usually saw in him. There was vulnerability there, too, like he was risking more than I realized, and without thinking, I whispered, "I don't want to lose you." "You won't," he said, without hesitation. "Not unless you want to." We lay there in silence, again. But this time, it wasn't awkward. It was heavy with possibility. He shifted closer, just slightly. Our foreheads nearly touched. His breath fanned against my cheek. I could feel every inch of him, his warmth, his heartbeats, and somewhere deep inside me, the fear started to give way to something stronger, hope, desire, maybe even love. Still, I didn't move. Not yet. I wasn't ready to cross the line, not until I knew it wouldn't ruin us. But I also knew I wouldn't be able to pretend anymore. Not after this. Eventually, I whispered, "Good night, Marcus." He paused, then replied, "Night." But even as we lay still, neither of us slept. We just stayed there, barely touching, but closer than we'd ever been. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. Every time I closed my eyes, I became hyper-aware of Marcus beside me, the slow rhythm of his breathing, the occasional shift of his arm, the faint brush of his knee against mine. And whenever I did drift off, it was into dreams that made waking up feel like a punch to the chest. By the time the first gray hints of morning bled through the cabin window, I hadn't moved an inch. Neither had he. When I finally sat up, the sleeping bag rustled enough to wake him more. Maybe he'd been awake the whole time, like me. He blinked up at me groggily, hair mussed, eyes still heavy with sleep. "Morning," he mumbled. I nodded, then slipped out of the bag and onto the cold floorboards. "I'll check the fuse box again. Maybe something reset overnight." He didn't stop me, but he watched me go. The air outside was biting, and I welcomed the chill as I stepped into the narrow crawl space behind the cabin. Anything to distract myself. I flipped the breakers again, jiggled the loose wire that Marcus had tightened with duct tape the day before. Nothing happened. Of course. Back inside, Marcus had made coffee with the camping stove. I took the mug he handed me, our fingers brushing. His touch lingered, not quite on purpose, but not entirely by accident, either. "You okay?" he asked, scanning my face. I nodded. He studied me a second longer. "No, you're not. I'm just tired," I deflected, taking a sip that burned my tongue more than I expected, and cold, and sick of this whole survival bonding thing. He chuckled, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. I sat on the couch, wrapping the blanket tighter around me. Marcus stood near the window, leaning on the frame like it was holding up more than just his weight. "Last night," he said slowly, "you meant it, right? When you said you didn't want to lose me." I looked down at my coffee. "Yeah." He nodded, once. "Me too." The silence that followed wasn't dramatic. It wasn't heavy with music or cinematic thunder. It was just real and terrifying. "I keep thinking," I said, surprising even myself, "that if I let this become something more, and then it goes wrong, I'll lose the one person I can't imagine not having in my life." Marcus turned. "What if it doesn't go wrong?" I laughed, quiet, bitter, shaky. "You say that like it's a choice, isn't it?" he asked, sitting beside me, close enough that our knees touched. "Isn't that what we've been doing this whole time? Choosing to orbit around it instead of falling into it?" I couldn't look at him. My eyes stayed on the grain of the wooden coffee table. My fingers tightened around the mug. "I've wanted to say something for months," I admitted. "But I kept thinking maybe it's all in my head. Maybe you're just being you. Friendly, flirty, physical." He smirked faintly. "I am charming." I elbowed him, lightly, but my heart was pounding now. I didn't want to risk it, I continued. Didn't want to be the one who ruined it by making it weird. His voice dropped low. "You didn't." My breath caught. I finally looked at him. There was something raw in his expression, like he'd stripped away every layer of confidence and was just there, vulnerable, honest. I like you, he said simply. Not in a grand gesture, not with dramatics. Just truth. I think I have for a while, he added, voice softer now, but I kept pushing it down, because I figured if you wanted something more, you'd say something. I scoffed lightly. And here I thought you'd be the brave one. I wrestled dudes for fun. Emotional vulnerability. That's the real danger. We both laughed, and it broke something in me. Tight, anxious weight that had been lodged in my chest for months. I reached out slowly, brushing a lock of hair away from his forehead. His eyes closed at the touch. Just for a second. Just enough. Tell me this isn't a phase, I whispered. Tell me you're not going to wake up next week and regret this. His hand found mine. He held it not tightly, not possessively, just steady. I won't, he said. I'm scared too. But I don't want to keep pretending. Not when this, he motioned between us, feels more real than anything else. I searched his eyes for hesitation. There wasn't any dot, just him, the same Marcus I'd known for years, but softer now, closer. Mine, maybe. He leaned in, slowly giving me space to pull back, to breathe, to rethink. I didn't. I met him halfway. The kiss wasn't perfect. Our noses bumped. My hand trembled. His lips were colder than I expected from the morning air, and mine were probably coffee-stained. But it was real, and it was enough. When we pulled back, I couldn't stop smiling. Neither could he. He rested his forehead against mine, our breath mingling in the narrow space between us. So, we just kissed, he said, grinning. Yeah, pretty gay of us. Extremely. He laughed, then kissed my cheek, my jaw, just below my ear. Light, careful, like he was still learning what was allowed. I don't want to rush anything, I said, my voice quieter now. He nodded. We won't. But I don't want to pretend anymore either. We won't do that either. There was a knock of relief in my chest, like something unclenched after being tight for far too long. We sat there, side by side, our hands still locked. I didn't know what came next, what this meant when we went back to campus, when we had to figure out who we were in front of other people. But for once, I wasn't scared of that future, because it had him in it, and maybe that was all I ever really needed. It's strange how everything and nothing changes all at once. After the kiss, we didn't say much for a while. We didn't have to. We just sat there, hands still entwined, bodies leaning into each other like we were afraid to let go, now that it was finally allowed. The silence wasn't tense, it was warm, easy, like we'd stepped into a version of our friendship that had always existed, just beneath the surface, waiting for us to stop pretending. Marcus kept brushing his thumb over the back of my hand, like he couldn't believe it was real. You know, he said eventually, voice low and thoughtful, for a first kiss. That wasn't terrible. I raised an eyebrow. Not terrible. He gave me a crooked grin, bit clumsy, kinda cold. You taste like burnt coffee. Oh wow. Deeply romantic, I said, laughing as I pulled my hand back and shoved his shoulder. I take it all back. That was absolutely a mistake. But even as I said it, I was smiling too hard to mean any of it. He leaned back into the couch, arms stretching behind his head like he owned the play switch. Let's be honest, he kind of did, in his way. I'm serious though, he said more softly. I've wanted that for so long. And now that it's real. He trailed off, glancing at me. It still feels like you're about to wake me up and say I was talking in my sleep again. I turned slightly, facing him fully. I'm not. He studied my face for a long second, like he was checking for cracks in my words. Then he nodded. Good, he said, because I don't want to pretend anymore. There was something fragile about the way he said it, like the confident, cocky Marcus I'd always known was stepping aside to let someone a little more vulnerable breathe for once. I don't either, I said, and I meant it, every word. We spent the rest of the morning wrapped in blankets, curled up on the couch like we'd been doing it for years. And maybe, in some way, we had. Just without the kisses. Without the soft way his head tipped against mine when the fire crackled too loud. Without the quiet hum in my chest every time his fingers found mine. It was almost too easy. Like this version of us had been waiting behind a locked door, and all we had to do was finally find the key. I keep thinking, I murmured, later. That afternoon, as the sun began to streak across the wooden floors, about what happens next. Marcus looked over at me from where he lay, with his feet on the armrest, like back at school. Yeah, classes, friends, people who'll definitely have questions. He nodded. We'll answer them, or not, whatever feels right. His tone was so calm, so certain, that I found myself believing him instantly. But what about us? I asked. He sat up a little straighter. We talk, we stay honest. We keep doing what we've always done, just, now with more kissing. I snorted. You're such a romantic. I know. He winked. Should I start writing? Poetry. Something with like metaphors and sunsets. Only if you want me to break up with you, before we even start. He grinned and leaned in, pressing a kiss to my cheeks, low, deliberate, and just enough to make my stomach flip. Seriously though, he said after a moment, it won't be perfect. People are gonna have opinions, and we'll probably screw something up eventually. But I'd rather mess up with you than keep pretending with anyone else. I looked at him, really looked at him, at the boy who used to tackle me in gym class, at the guy who brought me soup when I was sick and dragged me out of bed when I wanted to hide from the world, at the person who'd quietly taken up more and more space in my heart without asking permission. And now, he wasn't just in my life, he was it. I'm scared, I admitted. He nodded. Me too. But then he reached out and took my hand again, just like he had that morning. Only this time, it didn't feel hesitant. It felt like a promise. The power came back sometime around midnight, on our last night at the cabin. I woke up to the quiet hum of the fridge, the soft glow of the thermostat blinking green, and the familiar weight of Marcus's arm draped over my waist. We hadn't even discussed it, we'd just ended up in the same bed, after staying up too late, talking about everything and nothing. Our feet tangled beneath the blanket. I lay there for a while, just listening, his breathing, the creak of the wood above us as the heater kicked on, the whisper of the wind outside. It felt like the kind of silence I didn't want to break, the kind I could live in. When Marcus stirred, he didn't move right away, just tightened his grip around me, fingers sliding under the hem of my hoodie like he belonged there. I'm keeping the hoodie, he murmured into the back of my neck. It's my hoodie, I replied, smiling even as I closed my eyes. Again, exactly, which means it smells like you. I'm claiming it by right of boyfriend privilege. My chest fluttered at the word boyfriend. It rolled off his tongue so casually, but it hit me with full force. Not just because he'd said it, but because I wanted it. Wanted him. Boyfriend, huh? I teased. We haven't even had our first official date. This was our date, he said, pulling me closer. Nature, fire, card games, mild hypothermia, classic romance. I laughed quietly. You're such a disaster, but now I'm your disaster. I rolled over to face him. His eyes were still heavy with sleep, his hair flattened awkwardly on one side, and his smile was sleepy and real and mine. Yeah, I said softly, you are. We didn't say anything else for a while. We didn't need to. We packed up the next morning, and I couldn't stop watching him how he folded his clothes with exactly zero technique. How he hummed off-key to a song that wasn't playing. How he kept sneaking glances at me like we were still in some secret phase, still testing if this new thing between us would survive once we left the woods. When we loaded up the car, he walked around to the passenger side, tossed his bag in, and then paused. You drive, he said. I blinked. You never let me drive. He shrugged. Yeah, well, This time, I want to look at you. I didn't even bother hiding my smile as I took the keys. The drive back was quieter than the drive up, but not in a bad way. It was a comfortable quiet. Every now and then he'd reach over and fiddle with the music or rest his hand on my thigh. For no reason. At one point, we stopped for gas, and he came back with my favorite drink, without asking. These were the things that told me it was real. Not the kiss, not the words, but the little things, the ones that meant he was paying attention. When we pulled into the parking lot behind our apartment complex, neither of us moved right away. He looked out the window. So, now what? Now, I said. We go upstairs. We pretend we didn't just dramatically confess our feelings in a power outage. And maybe we do laundry because I'm pretty. Sure, we reek of campfire and bad decisions. He snorted. That's the most romantic thing anyone's ever said to me. I turned in my seat. Marcus. He looked at me. I'm not going to run, I said. He nodded once. Neither am I. And that was it. No grand speech. No dramatic music. Just two people who'd spent years orbiting each other, finally choosing to meet in the middle. Later that night, I found a note on my desk, scribbled in his handwriting on a piece of torn notebook paper. Next weekend, rematch. No rules, no mercy. I'm pinning you this time. P.S. Don't forget the hoodie. M.I. laughed, clutching the note to my chest for a moment before tucking it into the drawer next to my bed. It didn't say I love you. It didn't need to. It said everything else, and as I turned off the lights, knowing he was just one floor above, in his room still close, still Mignet realized something. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning, and for once, I wasn't afraid of what came next. I was ready. We both were.